Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. Advertising at the Super Bowl is an expensive endeavor. There is a lot of money involved, and that's the understatement of the century. Between hiring people to direct and shoot the ad, having market research to determine what you're going to do, hiring celebrities to participate in the ad, promoting the ad itself, and buying the airspace for the advertisement, which today is upwards of $5 million for just 30 seconds, there is a lot that goes into this. When you spend all of this money on an advertising campaign for the Super Bowl, whether it's an ad that only is designed to air once or whether it's designed to air for a long time after the game, at the very least, regardless of whether or not the advertisement is good, and whether or not the advertisement is achieving its message and is memorable, at the very least, you showed the ad. Whether it was a good investment or not is one thing, but you at least gotta show your advertisement as intended. Now imagine dropping all of this money on a Super Bowl advertising campaign, and imagine spending $20 million on this campaign, and you don't even get to show the advertisement as intended. You have to cancel and get rid of the biggest part of your ad. It's $20 million down the drain, and it goes down as one of the biggest advertising blunders in the over half-century-long history of the Super Bowl. Well, that's exactly what happened at Super Bowl XXV when Pepsi tried to air a giant advertisement and despite dropping 8 figures on it, was unable to even get it off of the ground. And this is the story behind the disaster. Before I talk about the advertising disaster in question, we need some context to understand why Pepsi was doing this, what they were going to do, and why this posed a ton of issues that ultimately led the company to pulling the plug at the last minute. The year is 1991, and we are near the height of the cola wars between Coca-Cola and Pepsi. These were the top 2 soft drink producers in the world, and there were rising tensions between the two companies to try and outdo each other, especially after the whole New Coke debacle back in the mid-80s. Coca-Cola and Pepsi were going all out to try and gain a greater percentage of the soft drink market. And it was a classic case of anything you can do, I can do better. And nowhere was that more apparent than at the Super Bowl. At Super Bowl XXIII back in 1989, Coca-Cola put together a 3D advertisement, which was the first ever commercial to be shown in 3D, and handed out 3D glasses for the halftime show. Now the show, featuring an Elvis impersonator and the world's worst and least impressive magic trick, is another level of bizarre and weird. But as disastrous as that show was, Coca-Cola went all out. Pepsi countered at the same Super Bowl by sponsoring the Diet Pepsi Talent Challenge, which was a talent competition before the game featuring NFL players. It was an absolute disaster. It was as bad as it sounds. If you want to learn more about that debacle and want to watch Reggie White try his hand at stand-up comedy, then click the card in the upper right corner. And both companies aired ads at Super Bowl XXIV, trying to one-up each other and establish supremacy in the cola wars. So what was the game plan for Super Bowl XXV? How are the cola companies going to go all out for the big game's silver anniversary? For Coca-Cola, they had a $1 million campaign called Crack the Code, where anyone who had one of these pieces could decode them by putting them against a television screen and could win prizes. But for Pepsi, that was child's play compared to what they had planned. Pepsi had an entire $20 million campaign in the works. They bought not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 60-second spots. A 60-second spot back then cost $1.6 million, so you do the math on that. Pepsi had about $9 million tied up in just the spots for this promotion. During these ads, a number would pop up on the screen. Every household who called the number on the screen would automatically receive a coupon for a free 2-liter bottle of Diet Pepsi. On top of giving away all that free soda, 3 additional lucky winners, which would be announced at the end of the game, would receive $1 million in prizes. Pepsi was going all out for this, and even brought Ray Charles on board for the ad. This was going to be one of the biggest, most expensive, and elaborate advertising campaigns in the history of the Super Bowl. The only problem? Yeah, it never actually happened. Now before I go any further, I just want to emphasize that this is 1991 that we're talking about. You might not see how such a contest could pose any problems today, and rightfully so. Heck, last year at Super Bowl XLV, Scott's and Miracle-Gro had an advertisement that allowed the over 91 million people watching the game to text a number for the chance to win the garden of their dreams. You can run promos like this that allow people to text a number and not have any problems whatsoever. But back in 1991, things were a bit different. There were no text messages. The first text was sent on December 3rd, 1992, so the only way to run a promo like this was to have people actually call into the number. Having viewers call in a number like this for a random television event is no big deal. It happened many times before, even by Pepsi. And heck, in the 80s and early 90s, there were hundreds upon hundreds of television ads for 1-900 numbers, with some being weirder than others. So in general, there was nothing wrong with having an advertisement where people called into a number. But the Super Bowl with an average television audience of 80 million people and a peak audience that was guaranteed to be at least 100 million people, that is an entirely different story. Back in 1991, there were 25,000 switching machines in the United States, with capacities ranging from 50 lines to over 65,000 lines. However, the average capacity was somewhere in the ballpark of 30,000. When you have the entire country watching the Super Bowl and watching this ad, naturally, what they'll want to do is call the number on the screen. And when you have the entire country calling the same number at the same exact time, the lines can get clogged up. And even despite that, maybe this wouldn't have been such an issue if the two teams playing in the Super Bowl were located in different parts of the country. If you had two teams that were more spread out, such as a team in Florida and a team in California, then maybe you'd be able to get away with something like this. But at Super Bowl XXV, Pepsi drew the short end of the stick by having two teams whose fan bases primarily reside in the same state. The Buffalo Bills represented the AFC, and they play their games in New York. The New York Giants represented the NFC, and while they play their games in New Jersey, the majority of their fan base resides in New York. And they used to play their games in New York before moving across the Hudson after a brief and utterly disastrous stint in Connecticut. While the whole country was watching the Super Bowl, it makes sense that the cities where the highest percentage of people will be watching the game are the cities of the two teams playing, which for all intents and purposes are Buffalo and New York City, located in the same state. And when you take that into consideration and the possibility that the lines get clogged, you have an impending disaster on your hands. Because there was a high probability that the impending flood of calls would force a 60-second delay and would force people to wait up to a minute to receive a dial tone, especially in New York, the FCC was up in arms about this. The FCC reached out to Pepsi to voice their concerns, because the idea that people would be unable to make phone calls for a period of time because of a Pepsi commercial had them livid. There was a legitimate concern from the FCC that people would die, and people's lives would be at risk because Pepsi had to run this ad. As James W. Spurlock, a special assistant in the FCC's Common Carrier Bureau, said on the ad, "If you're having a heart attack and you're trying to reach 911, a minute is a long time." Plus, a situation like this was almost unprecedented, and it might have been longer than 60 seconds. No one knew how many people would call the number, but the lowball estimate from the FCC was 5 million people. In the absolute best case scenario from an FCC standpoint, 2% of the country would be calling the exact same number at the exact same time. In the absolute worst case scenario, it was as high as 50 million people, and imagining 20% of the country calling the same number at the same time is a recipe for disaster. There has never been a situation in the history of the world where 5 million people tried to call the same number at the same time, so no one knew just how dangerous and costly this could be. Paul Rogowski, a spokesman for the United States Television Association, said on the dangers that this could pose, "It would have been as if everyone in New York City decided to flush their toilets all at once. Would the city's pipes hold?" And another person asked, "Would everyone call immediately or wait? How could we know? Even 5 million callers might have been a hell of a problem." And considering that the winner of the giveaway from the ad was going to be announced immediately after the game, I don't think anyone would have been waiting to call that number. It would have been pretty immediate. On top of all the concerns from the FCC, you had legal concerns. It begs the question why the lawyers in the FCC weren't consulted before dropping $20 million into this campaign, because this is a severe lack of due diligence on the part of Pepsi. However, if something happened during this ad where a person was trying to reach 911 to get an ambulance or was trying to reach the suicide hotline but couldn't get through because their emergency happened as Pepsi was airing the ad, and they wound up dying or getting severe injuries because of it, there was a legitimate concern that Pepsi could be held liable. Now, Pepsi officials refuted this claim and said that they never for 1 second concerned themselves with the legal liability associated with them, since it would have been difficult to specifically attribute the delays with them. As someone in law school, all I can say on the issue and how far any litigation would have gone is, it depends. The two magic words of any lawyer. However, even if a possible lawsuit would not have gone anywhere, and even if Pepsi came out in the right, it would not have changed the negative PR that came from it. The last thing Pepsi wanted was to have a major news outlet and media outlet running a story attributing Pepsi and the ad campaign to someone dying. Especially during the early 90s, when the cola wars were still going strong, Pepsi could not afford to have a misstep. Making a mistake by running an ad that isn't received very well is one thing, but making a mistake by running an ad where an actual person dies? It's hard to fathom just how much of a hit the company would have taken off of that. Oh, and I'm forgetting the elephant in the room. The United States was in the middle of a war during this time. Operation Desert Storm had commenced in Kuwait, and there were serious national security concerns because of it, to the point where security for Super Bowl XXV was extremely tight, and to the point where there was serious consideration to moving the Super Bowl and delaying the game. Even the halftime show was not shown live, as it was preempted for coverage of the war. And if there was a national security concern that was happening, and United States officials could not get in contact with each other over the phone because of a Pepsi ad, Holy cow, that would not be good. When you consider the backlash that the FCC gave Pepsi for this, any possible legal battles that the company would have had to fight off, the legit possibility that something catastrophic could happen because of the ad, and the negative public relations nightmare and backlash that could ensue, Pepsi made the difficult decision to let this $20 million ad campaign die, and they pulled the plug on the promotion. Before the game, Pepsi, instead of running one of their ads that they had planned, ran this hastily put together spot instead.
This week, Pepsi-Cola announced it was canceling the world's largest telephone call-in contest planned for Diet Pepsi on today's game. Pepsi made this decision following discussions with federal government and phone company officials concerned that extraordinary demands could be placed on the nation's telecommunications network. In light of world events, access to phone lines is of prime importance. Pepsi believes we should avoid anything that could have even the slightest chance of disrupting our nation's phone service.
As David Novak, the executive vice president of marketing and sales for the company, said on the decision, as world events have continued to develop, concerns about consumer access to phone lines have become of prime importance. We did not want to do anything that would have even the slightest chance of disrupting our nation's ability to communicate. And with that, every phone number, every commercial featuring the giveaway, and every reference to the promotion was quickly scrubbed from the ads. As for what Pepsi wound up showing, well, you might remember this ad campaign.
You know when it's right, you know when you feel it, baby. You hold it, you hear it, you taste it, it's right. You got the right one, baby. Uncontestably tasteable and intimately wonderful. You got the right one, baby. You got the right one, baby. You know when it's right. You know when you taste it. You got oh yeah. All right. You got the right one. If it's irrepressibly lovable, unsurpassably quotable, and intimately soulful, you got the right one, baby.
With 100% NutraSweet.
The good news, at least, was that Pepsi was able to somewhat salvage the situation. This ad was received incredibly favorably, and Pepsi was able to run this campaign for a few years. But all the money they spent hyping this campaign up, with roughly $20 million going into it, was thrown down the drain. This wasn't the last time that a company went all in on an ad campaign, only to have it get pulled before the Super Bowl, with the same thing happening with Tostitos a few years later at Super Bowl 31. To learn more about that, click the card in the upper right corner. But at least with Tostitos, that was an unfortunate tragedy that was truly out of the company's control. There was nothing they could do about it. This Pepsi debacle, on the other hand, could have easily been avoided if anyone, literally anyone, consulted with the FCC or the legal team and was told, hey, before you spend $20 million on this idea that we have never tried out before, here's why you might want to reconsider. And the hysterical part is that despite this insane debacle on Pepsi's end, companies still did not learn their lesson, because 1 month later, Nickelodeon tried the exact same thing. Not even a few weeks later, Nickelodeon saw this whole fiasco with Pepsi and still thought it would be a good idea to run an ad campaign where people called into a telephone number to receive prizes, such as Bugs Bunny watches and Bugs Bunny pool floats. And after over 10 million people called in one day, AT&T requested that Nickelodeon cancel the contest because the sheer volume of calls was overloading the system. And it was only at that moment did Nickelodeon call off the contest and realize that no, you can't do that on television. Today, Pepsi still advertises at the Super Bowl, and this incident at Super Bowl XXV didn't exactly detract them. They sponsor the halftime show every year. They put out ads pretty much every year, and at Super Bowl 30, they put out one of the greatest and most iconic Super Bowl commercials of all time with a security footage set to Hank Williams' song, Your Cheatin' Heart. This is one of the greatest, simplest ads ever put together. However, a word of advice to all companies who want to run multi-million-dollar ad campaigns at the Super Bowl: make sure you consult with your lawyers or someone in the FCC if some form of telecommunications is involved, so that you don't run into this nightmare, especially during a time of war. Because if Pepsi realized that beforehand, they could have saved millions and millions of dollars. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at Jaguar Gator 9 and subscribe to 60 Second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.